Greetings to all of you who are members and friends of Grace United Methodist Church on State Street in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I have great news for you. In case you weren't aware, Grace Church is not closed. We are wide open and busy and active. It just so happens that because of the COVID-19 virus, we're not able to meet for worship on Sunday mornings at this time. But that doesn't mean the church is closed. We still have a great deal that we are doing. I hope you are enjoying staying informed with the email blast on Wednesday mornings. If you or someone you know is unable to receive them by means of the internet and email, please let us know in the office. We have several folks to whom we mail that information every week because they don't have access to a computer and can't receive it any other way. So we'd be happy to do that. That's a way of staying kind of up to date and informed about some of the things that are going on at Grace Church, some of the things that we are doing and trying to keep up with during these challenging times. You know that this year, 2020, is Grace Church's 200th year. Our congregation was founded in 1820. And so we have a team working to prepare to celebrate that anniversary and to mark it at some events this fall around Thanksgiving time. We're hoping to be able to do those things. We know that we may need to postpone them till sometime next year so that we can gather in numbers and gather in safety to enjoy some of those things. But keep in mind that Grace Church's ministry and witness has been a part of the Harrisburg city and our region for 200 years now. Also, we are at work on an anti-racism prayer vigil that has been proposed. We haven't started yet, but we're working on a proposal to hold a prayer vigil outside the front of the church on State Street each Wednesday at midday. You'll hear more about that as we plan. If you'd like to be a part of that planning, please let me know, and we'll include you in the emails and the meetings and the planning that needs to go into that. But we're hoping to get that off the ground pretty soon and invite some of our friends and neighbors to participate with us. Since Grace Church occupies such a prominent location in the city, that's one of the things that we're working on these days and hoping to make happen. Keep in your prayers all those who are on our prayer list, those who are dealing with chronic conditions, but those who have experienced surgery and are undergoing treatments and recovering. Sally Snyder and Jim Klippinger, Wilma Fisher, Leroy Erickson, Barb Phillips and Bill Malcolm are expecting surgery and heading for surgery next month to alleviate conditions. Once their surgery is over and they get through some recovery, they'll be in much better shape. But those kinds of surgeries are always tense and worrisome. We learned the other day that Rebecca Lyons' sister Nancy Dorward has died after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. Jeff Frankenberger's mom is recovering well. I'm sure there are many others in your family and your community, your neighbors, for whom you're praying, especially in this time that makes all the things we deal with even more difficult. And of course, please keep those who are first responders and essential workers in our prayers. The duties that they perform and the work that they do seems not to be getting easier these days, but we trust that better days are coming. I must express appreciation to Shelley for the video you're about to enjoy and all the work that she does to pull us together and to keep us focused together on God's love and God's call to each and every one of us. I trust you are having a good day and a good week. Again, Don't hesitate to let us know at Grace Church if there are things that we can do to be helpful to you or your neighbors. It's good to greet you today. God bless you.
Good morning. My hope is that on days that we're not able to meet together and we're working through video ministry, that we might explore an opportunity to get to know some of our Grace members. This past week, I had the opportunity to meet with Sally and Neil Snyder at their home. Neil and Sally both grew up in the Halifax area. They were married March 4th, 1967. They have 2 daughters, 2 wonderful son-in-laws, 6 precious grandchildren ages 1.5 through 8. They have attended Grace Church since the mid-1990s and supported Grace Church when the church sponsored Livingston Dorr while he attended seminary. Sally is a piano teacher and Neil is a retired landscaper for the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Let's go to their home. I'm here at the home of Neil and Sally Snyder, and they have a gorgeous yard. Look at those flowers. And Sally is doing so well.
Those are also calla lilies.
Yeah, that was just a couple last year.
When did you plant all these?
Those are about a year ago.
Only a year.
They overwintered, yep.
And you have
Come over a little bit further yet. The ridge ends and then that other mountain is Peters Mountain behind it. This mountain up here is Broad Mountain. And this mountain over here is Barry's Mountain. This is a lacebark elm. This is native to China too. This I got at Longwood, the seed for this tree.
Here you can see the bark on here. It's really unique.
These are paperbark maples. These are native to Japan. But the kids wanted a tree tunnel, so I made a little tunnel and they have a bench.
They play in there.
Oh,
If you went around the corner past Sally there, you can see
There's a little bench.
the little bench in there. How cute.
These are real jaggy. These
They
are Norway
go
spruce.
inside. It's got a hollow. It needs some work done inside to clean it out a little bit.
Oh, you go in to play.
That tree is probably Neil's favorite there.
The red one in the middle.
That's a beech is Fagus, so that's Fagus sylvatica, and the calabar is purple fountain. So it's a weeping beech. Won't make it over the winter, but we had a mild winter, so that one's flowering. There's several others that aren't flowering yet. But,
What's the orange one?
the orange one is that they call butterfly weed, and that's a native. And you find it in pastures and hillsides
Here,
and
the
roadsides.
wind knocked that one.
Roadsides. They actually sell it in the market, but I dug these out of the field and brought them up.
We thank Neil and Sally for sharing with us their yard and landscaping, for in this beautiful creation we are reminded of God's glory and presence. We ask that God be with Sally as she continues to heal in her cancer treatments. Amen. I'm excited to be here today with Anthony Scheuerman, who will be playing Prelude for us. Anthony is not new for us at Grace Church because he's performed for us in various ensembles when we've had orchestra and played preludes before. So Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Right now I am a middle school and high school orchestra teacher in the Lebanon School District, right nearby where I went to college at LVC. And then I perform in various orchestras around Lancaster, Lebanon, York, and also do a bunch of wedding gigs. And
Well, it's a pleasure having you with us.
thank you.
The scripture today is taken from Genesis 28, verses 10 through 19. Now, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of this place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the God stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. And your descendants shall be like dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And by you and your descendants shall all the families of the earth bless themselves. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done that of which I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone which he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called the name of the place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. epistle reading is taken from Romans chapter 8, verses 12 through 25. So then, brethren, we are debtors not to the flesh to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of sonship. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is the Spirit himself bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the glorious liberty of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in travail together until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have been the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But we hope for what we do not see. We wait for it with patience. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
After having the opportunity to be back in the sanctuary at Grace Church last Sunday, it is disappointing not to be able to be back there again this week. But I hope you don't find that news discouraging. Merely disappointing. We will be monitoring the conditions in Pennsylvania week by week now, and keeping you posted on whether we will be able to worship in the sanctuary or not, week by week. I hope that you will be keeping in prayer all of those who are struggling through yet another spike in the coronavirus incidents. It is particularly difficult for those who are in business. It is also difficult for folks who are confined to their homes, have limited contact with others. Difficult for children. The challenge of getting ready for school reopening and what kind of shape that's going to take next month is an incredible challenge for staff members and teachers, as well as for state education officials in Pennsylvania. There's much to be in prayer for these days, and I encourage you to be diligent and faithful in your prayers as we are still in the midst of a terrible worldwide crisis. We have been, over the past weeks, reading our way through Matthew's Gospel and exploring some of the teachings of Jesus, most often in the form of parables. Today we encounter another one in the 13th chapter of Matthew, beginning at verse 24, where Jesus offers us the parable, and then a bit later in the chapter he offers us the interpretation. So here we are in Matthew 13. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, An enemy has done this. The slaves said to him, Then do you want us to go out and gather them? But he replied, No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, Collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will be thrown into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. This is the gospel of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I think there are two persistent problems that we are facing in the church today. There are many more than two problems, of course, but I call these persistent problems because they are issues that Jesus himself addressed and that we, in 2,000 years of trying, have been unable to overcome. The first problem is narcissism. You know what that is. It's all about me, all about what I want and what I need, all about what makes me happy and comfortable and satisfied. But in the church, and among Christians, it's supposed to be all about God, about what God wants and what God needs, and how we can work cooperatively with God to accomplish what God desires in us and in our world. It's so hard to keep an outward focus, a focus on God and God's call, that we struggle with it. It's so hard to make ourselves available to God and to God's purposes, because we are constantly drawn to seek our own way and our own comfort. Even our prayers can become an unvarnished effort to bribe God into doing what we want and what will meet our needs. After all, it's all about me and what I want. I call that problem that we struggle with narcissism, and it's a big one. We're at it all the time. The second problem that we struggle with, I'm going to spend a little more time on because it's a bit more complex. I call that problem superstition. That's the one that Jesus focuses on in today's parable of the weeds. Superstitions are those things that we want to be true or assume to be true, but they're not real. They're not true. Superstitions are those things that we want to be real, or we assume that they're real and they're not real. And we keep going back to them. We keep believing them. We keep wanting them. But they're not real. They're not true. When I think of superstitions, the first thing that comes to my mind is the number 13. You know how folks are sometimes afraid of the number 13 and avoid anything that has that number in it. But that fear is not based on anything. It's not real. 13 is just a number. It's the number between 12 and 14, and it doesn't have any power to threaten us or undo us. I may have told you the story before of a time when I was at a conference in Pittsburgh, staying at a high-rise hotel in the city. I'd gotten on the elevator to go up to my room just after I checked in, and there were two ladies riding with me. One of them pushed the button for their floor, and she remarked to her friend, "Oh, look, this hotel doesn't have a 13th floor." I looked where she was pointing at the control panel, and sure enough, the numbers went 11, 12, 14, 15. Then, well, I probably should have kept my mouth shut, but I have such a hard time doing that. I said, when she said, "This hotel doesn't have a 13th floor," I said, "Sure it does. Of course it does. Even though they skipped the number, there's still a 13th floor. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's still the 13th floor." Just then, the door opened on the 14th floor, and those two women got out because that was their floor. And I've wondered ever since if either one of them ever got any sleep that week because of what I said to them. In our better moments, you and I know that there's nothing evil or unlucky or diabolical about the number 13. But we still think twice about anything that bears that number. We still hesitate a moment when we encounter it. It's a superstition. One of those things that we think just might be real, but it's not. There are other things that we think are true, and we act like they're real, but they're not. I hear them in church with some regularity. Let me tell you a couple of them. Everything happens for a reason. Have you heard that one? That's a real popular superstition these days. Sometimes, in our lives and in our community, there are accidents, there are tragedies, horrible things that happen to folks and and to property and in events all around us, and there are unintended consequences that may not be anybody's fault or part of anyone's design. And we hear folks say that, everything happens for a reason. No, I don't think so. Because there really are accidents. And there really are tragedies. Things that weren't intended by anyone, that weren't meant by anyone, but they happen. They happen. And they disturb our life, and they disturb God's intention for life too. Because everything doesn't happen for a reason, as comforting as that thought might be. And then there's a corollary superstition to everything happens for a reason. The corollary superstition is God is in control. God is in control. There's no question that we want that one to be true. It's certainly comforting and reassuring to think so. But anyone who has read even the first page of the scripture knows that it isn't so. Ever heard of sin? We use the idea of God is in control to dodge responsibility, so that we don't have to acknowledge our own waywardness, our own failures, our own sin. Sin is the best evidence that God does not control our lives or our world in ways that we would like to believe or like to claim that God does. And God does not always get God's way. That's what sin is all about and what it means. Those things are superstitions. There are a couple of persistent superstitions that Jesus addresses in this morning's parable. The first one of them is something that we desperately want to be true. We count on being real, but it's not. Here we go. If we're good enough and wise enough, we will not have any serious problems. God will take care of everything. That too is a comforting thought. We tell it to our children. We work hard at being good and we work hard at being wise, so we'll be safe. But it doesn't work that way. Because good people, kind people, wise people get hurt and get sick and die just like everybody else does. If we are good enough and wise enough, we will not have any serious problem. That's a persistent superstition. I want to show you in just a moment what Jesus has to say about that. Certainly in this time of coronavirus, when we look around our community and see the people who get sick and the people who die, sometimes it's the best of folks. Oftentimes it's the folks who are working at the front lines in the hospitals, and we fear that if we open schools too quickly, it will be the teachers in the front lines of the schools who will get sick. That's already happened across the country. Sometimes it's the best people, the people who are working the hardest at being caring and kind and compassionate, who get sick and get hurt, and sometimes they even die. It takes apart that old superstition. If we're just good enough, then we will not have any serious problems. The second superstition that Jesus addresses in this parable is another one that we desperately want to be true. Love will conquer any problem that might arise. All you need is love. Isn't there a song about that? The simple truths that we face every day is that we live in an imperfect world in which bad things happen to good people. Love does not conquer all. Love does not prevent untoward things, unwanted things, tragic things from happening to us and to those we love. Even though it's a pleasant thought, and it certainly is a comforting idea, love will conquer anything. It's just a superstition. It isn't real. One of the most one of the most practical parables that Jesus told was this parable of the wheat and the tares. It used to be called, do you remember when we called it the parable of the wheat and the tares? Well, tares were poisonous weeds called bearded darnel. There was something very specific. In the early stages of the growth of bearded darnel, the plant so closely resembled the wheat that it was impossible to distinguish one from the other. So by the time they had grown enough to be distinguished, the wheat from the bearded darnel, the roots of the wheat and the weeds were so intertwined and entangled that it was not possible to pull the weeds out without pulling the wheat up too. It was essential to let them both grow together until harvest time, when they could be separated. In the parable, a farmer sowed good seed in his field, but in the night an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat. When the crop began to sprout and grow, it became obvious that there were weeds in with the wheat, this hated and dreaded weed. The servants offered to pull them up, but the wise farmer said, no, we must let them both grow together until harvest time. Then we will separate them. The farmer, knowing that to pull up the weeds was also to destroy the wheat. The diabolical picture of an enemy sowing weeds in a wheat field was familiar to the people of Galilee who first heard this parable. That mean deed was well known to them because it was something that sometimes happened. And we know that it happened because the crime and the punishment for doing so were codified in Roman law. It became against the law when the Romans were there to do such a thing. That's how we know that it was something that would happen. The disciples, after they heard this parable, they were puzzled by something in it, and they asked Jesus to explain it. And he replied by telling them that at the end of the age, the angels of God would separate the evil from the good. We tend to make a good deal of this end of the age talk, end of the world talk. And so did the folks in Jesus' time. But the point that Jesus is making by saying it this way, right now, in the days and years of our lives, he might have said, right now, in the days and years of our lives, good and evil are all mixed up, all entangled together, and there just isn't much that can be done about it now. The lessons of this parable are clear, but they're not easy. And that's the toughest one. The way life is now, good and evil are just mixed up together. And there's no superstition that's going to solve that and make it go away. That's just the way life is for now. This parable is intended to help us understand and to accept the notion that there will always be weeds in the wheat field. One of the last things that Jesus said to his disciples was, "In the world you will always have trouble." John chapter 16. Life is difficult. It's not always fair. The rain falls upon the just and the unjust. Matthew 5. Jesus never promised us that we could become so good and so wise that no misfortune or disappointment or tragedy or sadness would ever come upon us. Things happen in our world and in our lives that are beyond our power to prevent and beyond our power to fix. No matter how hard we work and no matter how good we may be, something or someone comes by while we're sleeping, while we're unaware, and sows the weeds in our field. When you discover weeds in the wheat field, don't belittle yourself or despair. Guilt and blame and shame only complicate the problem. We live in an imperfect world where evil is present, and it is a part of life, an unavoidable part of life for all of us. This parable also teaches us that sometimes there is not much, if anything, that we can do about the weeds in the wheat. Here Jesus tells us that there are situations in life so tangled up and so knotted up that they can't be untangled in this world. There are knots which no mortal can untie. We tend to be a generation that believes everything that goes wrong is amenable to a quick fix. We spend billions of dollars each year for medication to deaden our physical and emotional pain, thinking it will just go away. Our culture encourages this flight to the quick fix by assuring us that we can have a pain-free life. But this is superstition. It isn't real. Among those things that we want to be true, but never are. You know, I've mentioned to you before how I feel about those bath fitter commercials that just make everything in one's life perfect with a new bathroom. And I laughed at one of them just yesterday when it came on the television, and it said, with a new bathroom, your life will be hassle-free. Sounds good, doesn't it? Hopeful. But it isn't real. It isn't real at all. Jesus' parable teaches us that there is evil afoot in our world. There are evil persons and evil situations which we cannot change. There are evil circumstances which we have struggled with. Well, you know, the evil of racism has reared its head again in our attention in past weeks, and we are struggling with it still, struggling to overcome it, to address it in fair and just ways. As hard as we do, though, it is going to be one of humanity's deepest challenges if we are ever able to banish racism from our life. There are evil situations which we cannot change in the manner in which Christians usually think of dealing with the problem. Some years ago, M. Scott Peck wrote a book called People of the Lie. And in that book, he tells of his attempt to rescue a child from neglectful, hurtful parents. He makes a philosophical statement about evil in connection with that case that is shocking to those who like to think that love can remedy all problems. He said, I have learned nothing in 20 years as a psychiatrist that would suggest that evil people can be rapidly influenced by any other means than raw power. They do not respond, at least in the short run, to either gentle kindness or any form of spiritual persuasion with which I am familiar. That statement is so devastating to those of us who were brought up to believe that love and gentle kindness and spiritual persuasion can solve any problem. There is evil in our world that is beyond our power to fix. Jesus was encouraging his disciples by telling them this story and helping them to understand that they won't be able to fix everything. The parable teaches us that it's not always easy to distinguish between the good and the bad. Sometimes what we think to be a bad person turns out to be good, and the person we thought to be good turns out to have evil motives. This parable of Jesus teaches us not to be quick in our judgments and not to be naive either. There is not a way this is not a way of coddling evil, but the only sure way of protecting the good. Patience should not be read as passivity. The tares which are not distinguishable from the wheat at one stage will become clearly recognizable at harvest time. Let me tell you a story. This is one of my favorite stories. I'm not a great sports fan, but some of the stories that come out of sports teams and the experience of people who play sports was remarkable. The first African-American baseball player in the American League was a rookie by the name of Larry Doby. He played for Cleveland in 1947, and he was reputed to be a good player even before he arrived in Cleveland, an especially excellent hitter. He came to his first bat in his first game with the Cleveland team, and the fans waited to see. It was a disaster. He swung at the first 3 pitches and missed all of them by at least a foot. He struck out, and as he walked back to the dugout, the fans booed him off the field. Larry Doby stared at the ground as he walked back to the dugout. He went to the end of the bench, he sat down, and he put his head down in his hands. The next batter that day was portrayed in a movie called The Kid from Cleveland in 1949. He was second baseman Joe Gordon, an all-star hitter who had always hit this particular pitcher well. Everyone knew that Joe Gordon could not only hit the ball, but he could put it out of the park. He was going to save the day. Well, Joe Gordon stepped up to the plate. He swung at the first 3 pitches, missed each of them by at least a foot. The fans couldn't believe it. A huge silence fell over the crowd. Joe Gordon stared at the ground as he walked back to the dugout. He went down to the end of the bench, sat down next to Larry Doby, and put his head in his hands. That's the stuff of which baseball legends are made. Even today, more than half a century later, people wonder, did Joe Gordon strike out on purpose? Of course, nobody knew for sure except Joe Gordon, and he never talked about it. But I can tell you this. It is reported that from that day on, Larry Doby never went out onto the baseball field, but that he didn't reach down and pick up the glove of his teammate Joe Gordon and hand it to him. What manner of love is that? Even if this act on the part of Joe Gordon meant what we think it did not cure the problem of prejudice in the stadium that day or in the American Baseball League. It didn't do anything to address the problem of racism across our country, that persistent racism with which we still struggle. But it did represent everything that one person could do at that time and that place and under that circumstances. There are persistent superstitions that we would do well to recognize. If we're good enough and wise enough, we won't have any problems. Love will conquer any problem that might arise. So that we can focus our energies on the things that we can do, the tasks that we can accomplish, rather than wasting ourselves and our hopes on things that aren't real. If you've done all that you can with some problem that is beyond your power to fix, then it is enough. God will finish the job at harvest time. Amen.